This story is titled, My Parents Sent Me the Bill for My Wedding After Offering to Pay for It and Giving $350,000 to my sister, but they're shocked when I hand them the check. And this text. Hi everyone! Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. So, here's the deal. I've always known my parents have a favorite child. And of course, it's not me. My older sister, Natalie, has been the golden child for as long as I can remember. She could probably steal a car, and my mom would ask her if she needed gas money. I wish I were exaggerating, but this favoritism runs so deep it's practically tattooed on their foreheads. Natalie was the daughter who could do no wrong. Me? I was the daughter who could do no right. Or at least, no right that was worth more than a half-hearted, "Good job, honey." Growing up, the differences were impossible to ignore. Natalie always got the new stuff. New clothes, new gadgets, new everything. Meanwhile, I was rocking her hand-me-downs, praying the holes in the knees of her old jeans wouldn't get any bigger. She didn't even have to ask. My parents just gave her things. A new iPhone because she needed it for school. A private art tutor because she has so much potential. A convertible for her 16th birthday because she deserves it. And me? I got told I should feel grateful they even let me borrow the family car when I needed to get to work. I started babysitting when I was 14 and added waitressing to my resume at 16 because I wanted a laptop. My parents wouldn't buy one for me because I didn't really need it. You know, unlike Natalie, who absolutely needed her $1,200 MacBook for homework, but mostly used it to stream movies. One moment that sticks out in my memory, Natalie had decided she wanted to redecorate her bedroom before college. My parents were all in. They hired an interior designer, bought her new furniture, even had the walls repainted a trendy shade of gray. It probably cost them thousands. A week later, I asked if I could repaint my own room. Mind you, I was going to do it myself, with paint I was planning to buy with my babysitter. My dad laughed and said, "What's wrong with the color it is now?" It wasn't about the paint. It was the principle. Natalie got everything, and I couldn't even get permission to buy my own can of paint. It was a small thing, but it was one of those moments that stuck with me, because it felt so symbolic of our entire dynamic. By the time we were adults, I thought things would even out. Like maybe once we were grown-ups, they'd start seeing us as equals. Nope. If anything, the gap widened. Natalie married Jason, this smooth-talking guy she met in college, and their wedding was practically a royal event. My parents spared no expense. Vineyard venue, a live jazz band, a wedding dress that looked like it cost more than my first car. I didn't ask what it cost because I didn't want to know. But I did know about the $350,000 check they gave them afterward as a wedding gift to help buy a house. A house. I didn't even feel jealous at first. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't know how this worked. Natalie was the favorite. This was just another day in the life, but still it stung. My parents had never even given me $350, let alone $350,000. To be fair, I've always been the independent one. I've worked hard, saved money, and built a stable career. I've never needed my parents to bail me out or fund my life. And maybe that's why they treat me the way they do. They know I don't need them, so they don't feel obligated to give me anything. But Natalie? She's made dependency into an art form. She's the type who'd call my mom because her light bulb burned out and expect them to come over and change it. And they'd do it. Even with all that, I didn't resent Natalie herself. We were never super close, but we weren't enemies either. It's hard to hate someone for being handed everything on a silver platter when the real problem is the people doing the handing. I figured if my parents wanted to spend their money on her, fine. It wasn't my business. But the constant reminder that I'd always be second best? That's the part that eats away at you. Soon after their wedding, Natalie and Jason bought their dream house in the fancy part of town, with the help of that $350,000 check, of course. My parents were constantly gushing about them, how beautiful their home was, how successful Jason's career was, how Natalie was finally thinking about starting a family. Meanwhile, I was living my life quietly, working as a nurse, and saving for the future. I wasn't doing badly by any means. Jake, my boyfriend, and I were happy in our cozy 2-bedroom apartment. We'd been together for years, building a life brick by brick, but it didn't matter. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough to get the same recognition Natalie got just for existing. The thing that hurt the most wasn't the money or the gifts. It was the emotional favoritism. My parents' pride in Natalie was obvious. And it wasn't just about her accomplishment. They adored everything about her. When Natalie walked into a room, they lit up like Christmas trees. When I walked in, it was fine. "Oh, hey, sweetie, how's work?" It was like I was just a supporting character in her story. I don't want to make it sound like my parents were terrible people overall. They provided for me. I had a roof over my head, food on the table, and all the basics. But the emotional part, that was lacking. They just didn't see me the way they saw her. And the thing is, after a while, you stop trying. You stop hoping for the same love and attention because it's too painful to keep coming up short. I thought I'd made peace with it. I really did. But looking back now, I think I was just bottling it all up, waiting for the day when the scales would tip too far. And that day was closer than I realized. So after years of watching my parents play The Natalie Show, you'd think I would have been skeptical when they offered to pay for my wedding. But stupidly, I thought maybe this was their way of stepping up for me. Maybe they were trying to make up for all those years of making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own family. To take you back a little, Jake and I had been together for 5 years when he proposed. He's the kind of guy who actually listens when you talk and remembers all the small things you love. He saved up for months to buy me a ring that wasn't flashy, but was exactly my style. And when he got down on one knee during a hike at my favorite park, I couldn't say yes fast enough. We started planning right away, keeping everything simple. I've never been the type to want a giant, over-the-top wedding. Honestly, the idea of spending tens of thousands of dollars on one day makes my skin crawl. Jake felt the same way, so we agreed on a budget of $25,000. It wasn't cheap, but we'd saved enough to cover it without putting ourselves in financial stress. We wanted a celebration that was meaningful, not showy. Enter my parents. When I told them about the engagement, my mom's first reaction wasn't, "Congratulations," or "I'm so happy for you." Nope. It was, "You're not planning to do one of those courthouse weddings, are you? Because that's not going to look good." My dad chimed in, saying, "You're our daughter. We can't have people thinking we can't afford to give you a proper wedding." I should have seen the warning signs right then and there, but I brushed it off. They asked about our plans, and I told them we were keeping it small. We were thinking of a cozy venue, maybe around 80 guests, and we'd already started looking at caterers. "Well," my mom said, "if you're going to do it, you should do it right. Let us pay for the wedding." Jake and I were taken aback. My parents hadn't offered to pay for much of anything in my life before, so this felt like a big deal. Jake was optimistic about it. He thought it was their way of finally showing they cared. I was more hesitant, but my parents were insistent. They said they wanted to take this off our plate, so we could focus on enjoying the day. "We're not Natalie and Jason," I told them. "We're not trying to impress anyone." My mom just waved her hand like I was being ridiculous. "It's not about impressing anyone," she said. "It's about giving you a beautiful day." Jake and I talked about it later, and he convinced me to accept. "They're offering," he said. "Let them. Maybe this is their way of trying to make amends." And I agreed, thinking, what's the worst that could happen? I didn't realize the strings were already being tied. The first sign was the venue. Jake and I had our hearts set on this cute little barn that was equal parts rustic and elegant. It wasn't cheap, but it fit our budget, and it was exactly what we wanted. My mom hated it. "A barn? Are you serious? That's not a wedding venue. That's where people store tractors." She started pushing for this massive country club ballroom that looked like it belonged in a corporate conference. "It's classic," she said, "and it'll look much nicer in photos." I reminded her that this was our wedding, not hers. She countered by saying, "Well, if we're paying for it, we should have some input." That became the refrain for the entire planning process. Every decision we made was up for debate. The flowers we picked were too simple. The food we liked wasn't elegant enough. The DJ we booked was too casual. And my dress? Don't even get me started. I picked a flowy, bohemian-style gown that I fell in love with the moment I tried it on. My mom hated it. "You'll regret it when you see the photos," she said. "It's not flattering." It wasn't just my mom either. My dad got involved too. He kept talking about the guest list like it was a corporate merger. He added names I didn't even recognize. Business associates, old friends from college, distant relatives we hadn't seen in decades. Jake and I had wanted an intimate gathering, but suddenly our cozy 80-person wedding had ballooned to 150 people, most of whom we didn't even know. Anytime I pushed back, my mom reminded me, "This is our gift to you. Let us help make it special." I gritted my teeth and tried to pick my battles, but it felt like every decision was a fight. Jake could tell I was stressed and kept trying to cheer me up. "It's one day," he said. "The only thing that matters is that we're getting married." He was right, of course, but it didn't stop me from feeling like my wedding was slipping out of my hands. By the time the big day rolled around, it felt more like I was attending a wedding my parents had planned than the one I'd dreamed of. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful. The venue was stunning, the food was delicious, and the decorations were straight out of Pinterest, but it didn't feel like me. It felt like I was playing a role in someone else's show. During the reception, my parents gave these emotional speeches about how proud they were and how happy they were to welcome Jake into the family. My mom even cried a little, and for a moment, I let myself believe. I thought maybe this was their way of saying, we see you. We value you. Natalie was there, of course, acting like she was the unofficial wedding planner. She kept pointing out details she'd helped improve, like the centerpieces or the cake, which she'd somehow convinced my mom to upgrade without even asking me. I knew you'd love it, she said, smiling like she'd done me the biggest favor in the world. I smiled back, but inside I was screaming. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. Jake and I had a great time despite all the stress leading up to it, but something felt off. It was like this nagging little voice in the back of my head, telling me that this wasn't over. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, deep down, I knew it was right. 2 days after the wedding, Jake and I were still floating on that post-wedding high. We were married, and that was all that mattered. We spent the day unpacking gifts, writing down who sent what for thank you cards, and talking about our upcoming honeymoon to the Florida Keys, a quiet, budget-friendly trip we'd planned to enjoy some downtime. Then my mom called. "Can you stop by tonight?" she asked, her voice chipper in that overly sweet way she used when she was trying to seem casual. "Your dad and I want to go over something with." I figured it had to do with the wedding. Maybe she wanted to talk about leftover decorations or figure out where to store things. Jake offered to come with me, but I told him to stay home. "It's probably nothing," I said. "I'll be back in an hour." When I got to their house, my parents were sitting in the living room. My dad had a folder on the coffee table, and my mom had that fake smile plastered across her face. I felt my stomach tighten. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down on the edge of the couch. My dad leaned forward and pushed the folder toward me. "This is the breakdown of the wedding expenses," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "We've itemized everything." I opened the folder, my hands already starting to sweat. Inside was a detailed list of every single thing they'd paid for. Venue rental, $7,000. Catering, $9,200. Florist, $3,000. It went on and on right down to the dollar. The total at the bottom, $24,782.67. I blinked, thinking this had to be some kind of joke. "What is this?" I asked, my voice already shaking. My dad didn't even flinch. "We need you to reimburse us," he said. "As soon as you can." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I turned to my mom. You offered to pay for the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You said it was your gift to us." My mom had the audacity to look offended. "We thought it was the right thing to do at the time," she said. "But circumstances have changed. We need the money back." "What circumstances?" I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You just gave Natalie and Jason enough money to buy a freaking house. What circumstances could possibly mean you suddenly need $25,000 from me?" My dad's face hardened. "We don't need to explain ourselves to you," he said. "This isn't about Natalie. It's about you taking responsibility for your wedding." I was so stunned, I couldn't even find the words to respond. Taking responsibility? For a wedding I never asked them to pay for in the first place? A wedding they insisted on helping with so they could have control over everything? "You're serious," I said finally. "You're actually serious. We're not trying to be unreasonable," my mom said, like she was doing me some kind of favor. "We know it's a lot of money, so we'll give you time to pay it back. But we expect you to make it a priority." My blood was boiling at this point. I couldn't even look at them. I closed the folder and stood up. "I don't have anything else to say to you right now," I said, grabbing my purse. "I need to go." "Don't overreact," my mom said as I walked out the door. "This is just how things work sometimes." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got back to the apartment, Jake could tell something was wrong the second he saw me. "What happened?" he asked, pulling me into a hug. "They want us to pay them back," I said, my voice cracking. "The wedding. All of it. They gave me a damn itemized bill." Jake pulled back, his face a mix of shock and anger. "They can't be serious." "Oh, they're serious," I said, grabbing the folder from my bag and slapping it onto the kitchen counter. Jake flipped through it, his jaw tightening with every page. "We didn't ask them to pay for the wedding," he said. "They offered. They insisted." "Tell me about it," I said, sinking into a chair. "And now they're acting like it was some kind of loan." Jake paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "This isn't about the money," he said finally. "It's about control. They're trying to keep you under their thumb." He was right, of course. It wasn't about the money. Jake and I had the savings to cover it if we needed to, but that wasn't the point was that my parents had turned what was supposed to be a gift into a weapon. They dangled their generosity in front of me, only to yank it away when it suited them. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. Anger at my parents for doing this. Anger at myself for trusting them. Anger at the whole damn situation. "Fine," I said, standing up. "They want their money back? They'll get it." Jake looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm paying them back," I said, grabbing my laptop. "Every last cent. And then I'm done. No more favors, no more guilt trips, no more control. They're not getting another damn thing from me." Jake didn't try to talk me out of it. He knew me well enough to know that when I made up my mind, there was no changing it. I transferred the money that night, every penny of it. And just to make sure there was no room for misinterpretation, I sent my parents a text. The money has been transferred. Consider this the last financial or emotional interaction we'll have. I'm done. I hit send, then blocked their numbers. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was taking control, not just of my finances, but of my entire relationship with them. It wasn't about the money. It was about setting boundaries, finally drawing a line in the sand. But as I'd soon find out, my parents weren't the kind of people who took no for an answer. After I sent that text and blocked them, I expected silence, at least for a little while. I thought they'd need time to process the fact that I wasn't playing along anymore, but no. They didn't skip a beat. They just found other ways to get to me. Blocking their numbers didn't mean I was free. It just meant they had to get creative. The first attempt came the next morning. I woke up to several emails from my mom. I didn't even open them. I'd already braced myself for the guilt tripping. Instead, I marked them as spam and went about my day. By the afternoon, they'd tried Jake's phone. He showed me the missed call notification with a sheepish smile. They're really not giving up, huh? Of course not, I said, trying to act like it didn't bother me. Later that evening, my dad left me a voicemail using a number I didn't recognize. I knew it was him the second I heard his voice. "This is getting ridiculous," he said, his tone that infuriating mix of calm and condescending. "We're your parents, and we deserve a little respect. You can't just cut us off like this." Respect. That word made me want to throw my phone across the room. Respect wasn't something they'd ever shown me. Their version of respect was obedience, doing what they wanted, no questions asked. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. Jake tried to distract me with takeout and a movie, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept spinning, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with them. Every time I'd swallowed my pride, every time I'd let them walk all over me, every time I'd told myself, that's just how they are. This time was different. This time I wasn't letting it slide. The next day, the reinforcements arrived. By reinforcements, I mean my extended family. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe years. Suddenly, my phone was lighting up with texts and calls from aunts, uncles, cousins, even some family friends. They all had the same message, more or less. "You're being ungrateful. Your parents have done so much for you. This isn't how family behaves." I didn't respond. I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They weren't interested in my side of the story. They just wanted me to fall back in line. The messages kept coming, though. Some were passive-aggressive, others outright hostile. One cousin accused me of being selfish and said, "You're lucky to have parents who care about you at all. Some people don't even have that." As if I was supposed to feel grateful for the scraps of attention they threw my way, while showering Natalie with everything. Speaking of Natalie, it didn't take long for her to get involved. I wasn't surprised when she showed up at my apartment unannounced. Jake answered the door, and I could hear her high-pitched voice from the kitchen. "I need to talk to her," she said, already walking in like she owned the place. When I saw her standing in my living room, I felt my stomach turn. She had that fake, concerned look on her face. The one she always used when she wanted something, but didn't want to seem like a total jerk. "I'm just here to help," she said, holding her hands up like she was some kind of saint. "Mom and Dad are really upset. You don't understand what this is doing to them." I folded my arms and leaned against the counter. "What it's doing to them," I repeated. "What about what it's doing to me?" Natalie rolled her eyes. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. They just wanted to teach you a lesson about responsibility." That made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "A lesson?" I said. "Like the one they taught you? Was that about responsibility too?" Natalie's face flushed, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. "This isn't about me," she snapped. "This is about you being petty. You're tearing this family apart over a few $1,000s. I couldn't hold back anymore. "You don't get it, Natalie," I said, my voice shaking. "You've never had to get it. You've had everything handed to you your entire life. Meanwhile, I've been working for everything since I was 14. And now, the one time they pretend to care about me, it's a lie. So don't stand there and lecture me about responsibility." For a second, I thought she might actually apologize or back down. But instead, she just shook her head and said, "You're impossible." Then she stormed out. Jake came into the kitchen and hugged me. "You handled that better than I would have," he said. I was ready to tell her to leave the second she walked in. I wanted to feel good about standing up for myself, but all I felt was drained. Cutting ties with my parents was one thing, but dealing with Natalie and the rest of the family felt like fighting a battle on every front. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Over the next few days, I started blocking numbers left and right. Anyone who called or texted to guilt trip me went straight onto the list. It wasn't easy. Some of these people were relatives I'd once been close to, people I thought I could count on. But it was clear that they weren't interested in understanding my side of this. They just wanted me to fall back in line and keep the peace. Jake was my rock through all of it. He kept reminding me that I wasn't wrong, that I had every right to set boundaries and demand better. "You're not responsible for their feelings," he said. They chose to treat you this way. You're just choosing not to accept it anymore. He was right, of course, but that didn't make it any less exhausting. I felt like I was fighting for my independence all over again. Except this time, it wasn't about money or material thing. It was about respect. And if my parents couldn't give me that, then I didn't need them in my life. About a week after the fallout with my parents and the mess with Natalie, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, especially with how many random family members had been popping out of the woodwork to tell me I was ruining the family. But something told me to pick up this time. "Hey, it's Carol," the voice on the other end said. It took me a second to place her. Aunt Carol, my dad's estranged sister, the one we never talked about. I think the last time I saw her was at a Thanksgiving dinner when I was 10. And even then, I barely remembered her. She was kind of like this ghost in our family. No one outright said anything bad about her, but there was always this unspoken narrative that she wasn't one of us. "Oh, hi," I said, a little caught off guard. "What's up?" "I heard what happened," she said. "With your parents. Figured you could use a little perspective." I didn't know how she'd found out, but I wasn't surprised. News spreads fast in my family, and with Natalie's dramatic tendency, I'm sure the story had been thoroughly twisted by the time it got to Carol. Still, something about her tone was different. She didn't sound like she was calling to guilt trip me. "Perspective on what?" I asked, curious but cautious. "Your dad," she said simply. "And why this probably isn't as shocking as you think it is." That got my attention. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours, and what she told me left me speechless. Apparently, my dad had a history of pulling the same kind of manipulative, self-serving stunts long before I was even born. Carol said it all started after their parents passed away when they were in their early 20s. My grandparents weren't exactly rolling in cash, but they left a decent inheritance behind, enough to help their kids get on their feet. Carol and my dad were supposed to split it 50-50. But when the time came to divide the money, my dad told Carol there were unexpected expenses tied to the estate and that most of the money had already been spent. He convinced her that the only way to handle it was for him to take the majority of what was left. She believed him, because at the time, he was her older brother, and she trusted him. "He made me feel like I was being selfish for even questioning him," Carol said. "Like I should just let it go and be grateful for whatever scraps he decided to give me." But a year later, Carol found out the truth. There were no unexpected expenses. My dad had taken the bulk of the inheritance and used it to start a business with one of his friends. When Carol confronted him, he didn't even deny it. Instead, he turned the whole thing around on her, accusing her of being greedy and ungrateful. "He told me I didn't deserve the money because I wasn't as responsible as he was," she said. "And then he started spreading rumors about me to the rest of the family. By the time he was done, everyone thought I was some kind of villain trying to steal from him." Hearing this was like a punch to the chest. It was the same playbook he and my mom were using on me now, taking something that wasn't theirs, spinning it into a narrative where they were the victim, and weaponizing the family against anyone who dared to call them out. "What happened after that?" I asked. Carol sighed. "I tried to fight it, but it didn't matter. The family took his side. He was the golden boy, just like Natalie is now. I was blacklisted. No one would even hear me out. I could feel the anger rising in my chest. I'd spent my whole life thinking Carol was this distant, uninvolved relative who didn't care about the family. But now I realized she'd been pushed out, just like my parents were trying to do." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. She laughed bitterly. "To who? Your dad made sure no one would listen. And honestly, I was young. I didn't know how to fight back. By the time I figured it out, it was too late. Everyone had already made up their minds about me." The more she talked, the more everything started to make sense. My dad's need to control everything, his obsession with appearances, his ability to twist situations to make himself look like the victim. It wasn't new behavior, it was just who he was. But the thing that hit me the hardest was when Carol said, "I see so much of myself in you. You're strong, but you're still holding on to the idea that they might change. Let me tell you something. They won't. Your dad is who he is, and he's not going to wake up one day and realize he's been wrong. And same goes to your mom. The best thing you can do is walk away before they take any more from you." It was hard to hear, but she was right. I'd spent years hoping for a version of my parents that didn't exist, telling myself that maybe, someday, they'd treat me the right way, but they weren't going to change. Before we hung up, Carol said something that stuck with me. "You've got a chance to break the cycle," she said. "Don't waste it." I sat on the couch for a long time after that, staring at the wall and trying to process everything. It was like a switch had flipped in my brain. I wasn't just angry at my parents, I was done. Done waiting for them to see me, done letting them use me, done pretending like their behavior was normal. Jake came home from work and found me still sitting there, my phone in my lap. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I think I finally am." I told him everything Carol had said, And he wasn't surprised. Honestly, that tracks, he said. Your dad's always been a little intense about control. Intense is one way to put it, I said, laughing despite myself. Carol's story reminded me that I wasn't alone, that this wasn't just about me. It was about a pattern, a toxic cycle that I had the power to break. I'd set boundaries, I'd paid them back, and I was working on building a life without their toxicity hanging over me. Things were calm for the first time in what felt like forever. But of course, that couldn't last. A few days later, I was scrolling through Instagram when Natalie posted one of her classic humble brag photos, a flat lay of luxury travel brochures on her kitchen counter. The caption read, "Big plans in the works for our anniversary. So grateful for the support of my amazing family." Something about that post made my stomach turn. Support of my amazing family? What family? Jason had a decent job, but he wasn't bankrolling first-class flights. And Natalie wasn't exactly earning six figures. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the timing was just too coincidental. I decided to do some digging. I wasn't looking to start drama, okay, maybe a little, but mostly I just wanted confirmation. I reached out to Kim, a mutual friend of mine and Natalie, under the guise of catching up. After some casual small talk, I steered the conversation toward Natalie. "So, what's this big trip she's planning?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Kim didn't hesitate. "Oh, yeah, she's been talking about it for weeks. She wants to do this over-the-top anniversary trip. Maldives, luxury villas, the works. She said your parents were helping out. Didn't they tell you?" "No, Kim. They most certainly did not." I thanked her and got off the phone as quickly as I could. My blood was boiling. So that was it. That was the tight spot. They didn't need my money to pay bills or cover some emergency. They needed it because Natalie wanted to sit in a cabana, sipping cocktails, while Jake and I stayed home paying off a wedding they'd insisted on funding. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer entitlement. The idea that Natalie couldn't stand the thought of me having something nice without her swooping in to upstage me. When I told Jake, he shook his head in disbelief. "It's like she can't handle you being happy," he said. "It's pathetic." Pathetic didn't even begin to cover it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My parents had manipulated me, guilt-tripped me, and humiliated me. All so Natalie could keep living her pampered little life. And the worst part? They didn't even try to hide it. They just assumed I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. I debated confronting them, but honestly, what was the point? They'd just deny it, or spin some ridiculous story about how I was overreacting. Instead, I decided to take the high road. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd gotten to me. I didn't have to lift a finger. Karma took care of it for me. And honestly, it was like getting VIP seats to the best drama of my life. Remember how Aunt Carol had spilled all the tea about my dad's shady history with her inheritance? Well, she decided she wasn't done. With my blessing, she posted her story on Facebook, laying it out in excruciating detail. The post went semi-viral in our small town, and the fallout was immediate. My parents had always tried to present themselves as this perfect, generous couple who were pillars of the community. But Carol's post painted a very different picture, a picture of manipulation, greed, and favoritism. Suddenly, the cracks in their shiny facade were visible to everyone. Their social circle shrank overnight. Friends stopped calling, neighbors started avoiding them, and even some of the family members who'd been blindly defending them began to pull back. A few relatives reached out to Carol to apologize for not believing her all those years. She told me later that it felt like finally getting justice after decades of being painted as the problem sibling. But the best part? The pressure on my dad to pay Carol back became impossible to ignore. People started commenting on her post, asking if she ever got the money he owed her. When she replied, "No, but I'm still hopeful," the public shame must have been too much for him to handle. Within a month, Carol texted me with a picture of a check for $40,000. Guess he finally learned his lesson. I was thrilled for her. She deserved every penny, and then some. For me, it was like seeing proof that my dad wasn't untouchable after all. He could be held accountable, even if it took decades and a little public humiliation to make it happen. Then there was Natalie's over-the-top anniversary trip. You know, the one she'd bled my parents dry for. Turns out, Jason wasn't as thrilled about the whole thing as she probably hoped. I wasn't surprised. Jason always seemed like a decent guy, but Natalie's entitlement could wear down even a saint. Word got around that he'd found out about the money she'd squeezed out of my parents, and it didn't sit well with him. What started as a small disagreement spiraled into a full-blown fight. Jason apparently felt blindsided and told Natalie she had no business dragging my parents into funding their lifestyle without even consulting him. Natalie, predictably, didn't see the problem. She doubled down, and Jason eventually had enough. By the time the trip rolled around, he refused to go. Natalie jetted off to Bora Bora alone, posting her classic Instagram humble brags like, "Sometimes you just need to take time for yourself." Sure, Natalie, that's definitely what happened. While Natalie was busy trying to salvage her image on social media, Jason wasn't sitting idle. When she got back, he hit her with divorce papers. I heard through mutual friends that he was done with her entitlement and deceit and didn't want to deal with the fallout anymore. And here's where karma really kicked in. Jason wasn't just divorcing her. He was also taking half of their house in the settlement. You know, the house my parents had poured $350,000 in. Ouch. Natalie tried to fight it. She played the victim, whining to anyone who would listen about how unfair Jason was being. But at the end of the day, the law was on his side, and he walked away with his share of the house. This left Natalie scrambling. Suddenly, her cushy life was looking a lot less secure. Naturally, she went running back to my parents. She moved in with them temporarily and immediately started making demands. She wanted money to furnish her room, money for spa treatments to recover from the stress, and even asked them to fund a shopping spree because nothing in her closet felt right anymore. My parents, already feeling the heat from Aunt Carol's viral Facebook post and their rapidly shrinking social circle, tried to keep up. But their finances were stretched thin, and they were starting to crack under the pressure. By this point, my parents were in full damage control mode. They sold their house to downsize into something more affordable, but the money from the sale wasn't enough to fix their problems. They were still bleeding financially, and now Natalie was an added expense they couldn't afford. Things finally hit a boiling point when they asked her to chip in with some of the money she'd gotten from the divorce settlement. Let me tell you, the irony of that request was not lost on me. My parents, who had bent over backward to give Natalie everything, were now asking her for help. And Natalie, she refused. She flat out told them it wasn't her responsibility to bail them out. And honestly, I don't know if I laughed or cried harder when I heard that. After a heated argument, they kicked her out of the house. From what I've been told, it wasn't pretty. Shouting, accusations, the works. And just like that, the golden child was out in the cold. Now, Natalie and my parents aren't speaking. They cut ties with her completely. My dad has retreated from the public eye entirely. And my mom is still trying to salvage what's left of their social reputation, though I don't think she's having much luck. As for me, life has never been better. Jake and I finally went on our honeymoon to Greece, and it was everything we'd dreamed of. Gorgeous sunsets, incredible food, and zero family drama. When we got back, Aunt Carol came over for dinner to celebrate her $40,000, and she joked that she'd finally gained a niece after all these. The last I heard, Natalie was bouncing between friends' couches, still blaming everyone but herself for her situation. My parents are stuck in their downsized house, trying to rebuild the social circle they worked so hard to destroy. And me? I'm sitting here, happy, at peace, and finally free of the chaos. Karma came through, and honestly, it's never tasted sweeter.